Welcome to the Daily Insider here on Vegas Insider. I am Kevin Rogers. Today is Friday, December 31st, 2021. So we wrap up the year. Vince Akins will join us. He normally joins us on Thursdays, but we saved him for Friday to wrap up the year. And he's got plenty of good trends to hand out for the two college football semifinals today. The Cotton Bowl between Alabama and Cincinnati, followed by the Orange Bowl tonight between Georgia and Michigan, and also several NFL games. And in case you missed the news, the Vikings will be without quarterback Kirk Cousins. He is in the COVID protocol, and he will not play Sunday night when Minnesota visits Green Bay. That's one of the games we're going to hit on. And former Oregon State Beaver Sean Mannion will get the start against Green Bay. And they right now are around a 2-touchdown underdog against the Packers. So I think it's fair to say maybe stick the fork in the Vikings right now. Never know. We'll see. But that's the big news of the day, that Kirk Cousins will not play on Sunday night against the Green Bay Packers. Before we get to Vince, let us tell you about BetMGM. You know who they are? They're the king of sports books. New players only. Bet $10 to win $200 if your team scores a touchdown. Bet on any NFL money line. And if your team scores a touchdown, you'll receive an additional $200 in free bets. Again, for new players only, must be 21 years or older to play. And it is legal in the following states: Arizona, New Jersey, Indiana, Colorado, Tennessee, West Virginia, Iowa, Virginia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C. only. Full terms and conditions apply. That is BetMGM. They are the king of sports books. All right. Let's get to our man, Vince Akins, talking trends. And Vince made it to the final day of 2021. So good to see you again. And let's get right to it. College football playoffs. Let's start with Alabama, as they are taking on Cincinnati in the Cotton Bowl down in Dallas. And, Nick Saban's had a lot of success in these semifinal games. And big spot for Cincinnati. We'll see if they can hang. What do you have for trends?
Absolutely. Obviously it wasn't a playoff game last season, but they did hang with Georgia, losing by a couple points there and covering, as not quite a big a dog last year in that New Year's Day Bowl. So obviously even a bigger situation for the Bearcats here. What I want to focus on this game is Alabama's passing game compared to Cincinnati's really strong pass defense. I don't know that everyone always pays attention to just how pass heavy the Alabama has become. This season, throwing for 348 yards per game, rushing for just 148 yards per game, which is Alabama's lowest total rushing yards per game going back to 2006. So they've really become a pass-heavy team. So I'll pull a few trends and statistics here looking at that. Starting with Alabama, this one just goes back to October 2020. Alabama has gone under 8 straight games when they threw for at least 360 yards last game. Alabama threw for 421 yards in that upset victory over Georgia in the SEC championship. After a huge passing game, obviously, looking at their recent passing totals, that maybe it's just an above average passing game for Alabama these days. But they have gone lower scoring next game. So now looking at the spread of this game, we're looking at all bowl teams here, playoff game and or bowl game. Teams that come into a bowl game having thrown for at least 400 yards last game, just 21-37 against the spread in those games. So, think about some different bowl factors, extra time to prepare. This game specifically, Cincinnati having one of the top pass defenses in the country. Teams that really thrown last game coming into bowls have not done particularly well against the spread. Now, turning back to the total, we're going to look at a 3-game sample size here. And that's bowl teams that have thrown for at least 350 yards per game over their past 3 games. And those teams have hit the under in bowls 62.3% of the time. It's 20-33 on the under. Alabama's actually thrown for 433 yards per game over their past 3 games. It's actually a little more than just the total from that last game of 421. This one goes back 3 games. And finally, just a little nugget here that can go playoff specific here. Alabama is the huge favorite. There's a limited sample size of just these playoff games, but favorites of 10 or more points in the playoffs. 5 of those 6 games have gone under the total. So I know I mentioned a couple of interesting under nuggets here, including that one. Double-digit favorites in the playoffs. So 5 of those 6 games have gone under the total.
All right, so this total at 57.5 at BetMGM, and we know how potent Cincinnati's offense is, again, against a lot of the AAC teams. And look, they won at Notre Dame. We can't take that away from the Bearcats, but big spot for Luke Fickell here, and we'll see if they can compete with this Alabama team. Now let's shift over to the Orange Bowl tonight, Vince, in Miami, Georgia and Michigan. Bulldogs laying 7.5 against the Wolverines. Michigan off a couple big wins here to keep their season going. We knew Georgia would be in the Final Four regardless of their result in the SEC title game. But now Georgia's got to get back on track. Great defense. Michigan, a dog after they were a dog against Ohio State a few weeks ago, and we saw what they did to the Buckeyes. But what do you have here with the Bulldogs and the Wolverines?
Yeah, first I talked about passing offense in that first game, looking at the Cotton Bowl. I wanted to cover one bowl system, looking at pass defense. This one actually covers both of these games. Cincinnati has their really strong pass defense, allowing 168 yards per game through the air. Georgia very similarly allowing 169 yards per game through the air. Obviously, a tougher schedule than Cincinnati. But teams in bowl games that have allowed less than 180 passing yards per game cover 58% of those games historically. So we talk about how really strong pass offenses struggle in some certain situations there in bowl games. Strong pass defenses have done really well in bowl games, and that's active in both these games with Cincinnati and Georgia today. Looking at this game specifically, a couple of interesting nuggets here. First off, Michigan 1-10 against the spread. This one goes back to October 2011 as a dog coming off a game as a favorite where they covered. So they were 11-point favorites in that Big Ten championship game, demolishing Iowa 42-3, easily covering by 28 points there. 1-10 against the spread as a dog now coming off a game as a favorite they covered. And then a really interesting nugget here with Michigan as a dog. So obviously they won as a 7.5-point dog, very similar to this line against Ohio State earlier this year. Before that, Michigan had lost 28 straight games outright as an underdog of 4 or more points. So that's a pretty low number to look at. That goes all the way back to 2008. So we're spanning the Jim Harbaugh era and before, just 8-19-2 against the spread in those games. But looking at those games, these are not huge lines. Like, we're not talking about the possibility of huge upsets. I looked at that. 20 of those 28 games, they were just a single-digit underdogs. You think about it, that's not a huge upset bar to be clearing here. Very similar line to this game. So Ohio State, obviously, they pulled off that upset. Before that, they'd lost 28 straight games to an underdog, at least 4 points. 20 of those coming where the line was between 4 and 9.5 points. You're not, you're thinking about the money lines there, plus 200 and stuff. To lose 20 straight games in that situation is really noteworthy for that. Michigan has not been a upset-driven team.
That's just an unbelievable number, Vince, that I guess it goes to show you, I hate to use this term in sports, but I do. It's like Harbaugh is a bully. When they're playing Rutgers and Indiana and Northwestern, all these other teams, all these mid-tier teams, the Big Ten, they beat them. And we knew how little success they had against Ohio State for years until they won that game, last month. But I feel like Michigan, that just goes to show you that in those big-time spots, they just don't show up, or the other team just outclasses them. Yeah,
it's definitely, obviously, they got over the hump against Ohio State this year, but it's definitely been more than just Ohio State. That's a lot of times what everyone thinks about against Michigan. But they, tough spots in general, playing some of the other top Big Ten teams. They really have not come to play, particularly pulling off any major upsets in those spots.
Now let's take a look at the NFL coming up on Sunday, Vince. The Chiefs and the Bengals, big matchup inside the AFC in Cincinnati, and the Bengals trying to get closer to winning that AFC North title. Basically, a Chiefs team winning the AFC West title, and the Chiefs are on fire. Now it looks like the team to beat, the number 1 seed potentially in the AFC. Kansas City laying 5 now at Cincinnati. What trends do you have in this game?
Yeah, obviously a huge spot for both teams, with the Chiefs having the potential number 1 seed on the line, and the Bengals controlling their destiny in the AFC North here, looking to wrap up that division, potentially with a win. So starting on the Chiefs side, the Chiefs have not, over the last few years, not performed all that well against the spread typically, but they are a team that gets very run heavy. I don't mean running the ball in the actual football sense, but they go on runs where they cover and they don't cover. And to illustrate that, just December 2019, the Chiefs 9-0 against the spread when the total's under 56, and they covered by at least 6 points last game. So big cover last game, eliminating a couple of games that are extreme totals that sort of skew that. 9-0 against the spread. Obviously, last week they covered by 16 points in that big victory over Pittsburgh. That was never a game. So huge cover last week. They have a few of these in a row now. They do well against the spread that sort of built upon itself for the Chiefs. On the other side, a team that does not do well building momentum for itself historically is the Bengals. Just going back to November 2015, Bengals have lost 11 straight games and are just 1-9-1 over those games against the spread, when they've won 2 straight games. So you talk about getting on winning streaks. The Bengals, two straight wins, have not won that 3rd straight game in 11 attempts here. And that includes they just won these last 2 games against Denver and Baltimore. And this streak includes 5 games where they were favored and lost outright in all 5 of these games as well. So obviously the dog here today. But these have not all been terrible spots for the Bengals to be in. 5 of these 11 games they've been favored, and yet they've not gotten over that hump to win 3 straight games in 11 straight attempts. And finally, I pulled up a note here just because you think about the Bengals and what was noteworthy recently. Obviously, Joe Burrow's passing performance last week and the Bengals having 498 passing yards as a team in that victory over the Ravens. So looking at the spread for a team that's thrown for at least 450 yards last game, nothing too noteworthy there. We're going to talk about the opposite side of the ball in a minute here. But the total for those teams have thrown for at least 450 yards last game, 31-18 over under. So 63% on the over. Historically, just since 2018, that's 8 out of 10 of those games have hit over. So huge passing game last game. Obviously, there's you can see the logic and why the over might be tempting in the next game, and that's actually hit at a pretty nice clip there, 63%.
What's interesting about the Bengals, Vince, is that they've been so up and down at home this year. 4-4. They lost an overtime game to the 49ers. The Chargers blew them out. The Browns blew them out. They lost to Green Bay in overtime. And they've actually been a little more successful on the road, 5-2, than at home, 4-4. And Kansas City, we know they're good everywhere, but they've always been a good road team. There's always been the stigma on the Chiefs that, only at Arrowhead they dominate. But really, they've been a good road team also. So that one stat you brought up about the Bengals, and I understand Burrow's changed things, that they're not as bad as they were, but that they can't sustain a long winning streak.
Yeah, and much of the home field. Cincinnati's not. Think about teams that generally have a huge home field advantage. Cincinnati's not one of those spots. You think about it. I would expect a pretty good home crowd there this week, considering how big the game is. But there could be a lot of Chiefs fans there as well. To be honest, and not a team that really draws well at home, and not a team that's had a huge home field advantage historically.
Now let's look at the Rams and the Ravens. And Baltimore's been decimated by injuries. I mean, we know this is not the same team that, when healthy, what they can be a force in the AFC. On the flip side with the Rams, though, Vince, they're coming off this win at Minnesota last week. They beat Arizona a few weeks ago. It's like now the Rams are kind of getting it going. They had that Seattle win on the Tuesday night. So now the Rams went from Super Bowl potential team at the beginning of the season, kind of fell off a little bit, and now they're back to being in that mix. And who knows, again, that NFC is very wide open. But what do you have here with the Rams taking on the Ravens?
Yeah, this one might be an interesting litmus test for the Rams. You think about, the number 1 seed is still in play for the Rams. We're talking about this next game in a minute. That might eliminate that a little bit. But, the possibility of having to go to a place like Lambeau in the playoffs down the line, if they ultimately want to be Super Bowl contenders, playing in a colder weather city, tougher environment at Baltimore might be an interesting litmus test for that this week. Start with the Ravens. I feel like this is their favorite trend to go with on this show. But last week it didn't hit for the first time. The Ravens are now 14-1 against the spread as regular season underdogs, going back to November 2017. So last week I mentioned that trend as well, and then gave a couple of reasons why backing the Bengals. I ultimately backed the Bengals in that game. But still noteworthy the way Harbaugh prepares, and even in these tougher spots, just think about last week in recency. But now with at least Tyler Huntley, if not Lamar Jackson, back, what they've prepared to do against the Browns, the Packers recently, is a regular season underdog, staying competitive, and now getting these points at home here. So I wanted to add a little follow up to that. Obviously, based on their against the spread record as a regular season dog, they haven't failed to cover as a dog in games recently all that often. But looking a little bit farther back before that to see when that has happened, this one goes back to November 2007, and this is they are 10-0 against the spread off a game as a dog of less than 11 points where they failed to cover by more than 4 points. So last week, obviously, that game ended up getting to a touchdown line. They failed to cover significantly in that game, failed to cover by 13 points. Strong against the spread performance the next week when they failed to cover as a dog. Final thing for this game, I just mentioned the Bengals, that 498 yards passing in that game. So I want to look at the other side, the defense that gave up that kind of passing yardage last game. So we'll start with the total here because the Bengals have favored the over. It does also favored the over a bit for the team that allowed at least 450 passing yards last game. Those teams are 29, 19, and 2 over-under historically. So 60% on the over when you allowed the 450-plus passing yards last game. Also pretty good against the spread as well. Teams are 29 and 20 in this spot, so 59% covering the next game. So a little bit of a rebound spot there for these teams that really got shredded in the past last game.
I think you need to put an asterisk, Vince, on that one trend. The Ravens are 14-1 against the spread as a regular season dog when you're down to your third-string quarterback.
Sure.
And take the loss out. I mean, I know it's not going to be that way because, a lot of that's with Lamar and, he was a really good dog when he entered as a starter. And then even Tyler Huntley got the ATS cover against Green Bay a few weeks ago. But you're not a Josh Johnson. I mean, it's kind of like, what are you supposed to do?
Yeah, and the interesting part is that Johnson, I don't know that he was all that bad in that game. Conservative, I think the big thing, and looking at some other statistics for the game, the big thing that was missing from the Ravens last week was their threat running the ball. That's the quarterback position. They had just 39 rushing yards in that game against the Bengals. I think that came down to, you think about their backs to stay their offensive line. If their quarterback can't run the ball, it really makes it a difficult spot. However, they had run for 100-plus yards in 5 straight games before that. A lot of that work was by Huntley the previous 2 weeks. That gives them a different dynamic that they were really missing last week, and it does seem like that's going to be back, depending if Lamar plays or not, how limited he is. Certainly if Huntley's back, that rushing dynamic from the quarterback is going to be back for the Ravens.
Now let's look at the final game, Sunday night, Vikings and the Packers. Now, this game was taken off the board for a little bit because Kirk Cousins placed the COVID protocols. Sean Mannion will get the start for Minnesota at quarterback. And now, BetMGM does not have a number on this, but I'm seeing some other numbers that the Packers laying 13, total around 42. So that's where it's hanging now. But regardless of that, what trends did you pull up for this game?
Yeah, a couple of interesting nuggets here that do still apply because that line's only going up, if anything. When we see, I would expect it, somewhere around 13 points. Probably makes sense given where it was with Kirk Cousins in the lineup at 7.5 this week. So first off, just an interesting nugget here. Nothing bang-wise, but the Packers have won their last 2 games. You have that Baltimore game 2 weeks ago, and then the Browns last week. It's big favorites in both games, but failed to cover pretty significantly in each game by more than 5 points. The last time a team has won 2 straight games while failing to cover by at least 5 points in each was all the way back to 2013 and the Seahawks in that case. And it's a pretty rare occurrence. So you have a team, huge favorites, 2 straight weeks, win, but don't cover by a decent margin in both weeks. You don't see that very often. Now you think about Green Bay as a huge favorite again here for the 3rd straight time. So a couple of things that's specific to these teams. First off, interesting nugget on the Packers here. The Packers are 0-6 against the spread and actually 0-6 straight up. Though I might be a little more hesitant about the straight up idea with Sean Mannion in the lineup here. But 0-6 against the spread, 0-6 straight up since January 2017, facing a team they lost to in their last same season meeting. So there's a couple of divisional matchups in there, as well as a couple of teams that they faced in the playoffs, having lost to in the regular season already. Obviously, Minnesota won 34-31 at home in Week 11 in this first matchup. Playing the Packers again, they've not done very well against teams they already lost to on the season recently. On the other side, a huge team trend here favoring the Vikings, and obviously going to be active with them. It's huge underdogs in this game. Minnesota 16-0 against the spread. This one goes back to 2012 as a dog, coming off a loss as an underdog by less than 14 points. So last week, competitive loss as an underdog that happened for them against the Rams, lost 30-23 as a small home dog. Now dogs again, 16 straight covers. And it's already 2-0 this season with wins against Seattle and the Chargers. And actually, going back to just 2018, they are 5-0 against the spread, or 5-0 straight up in this spot as well. So 5 straight wins as an underdog in this spot, just going back to 2018. Obviously, again, now with Sean Mann in the lineup, the idea of a upset win might be a little discouraged here, but they performed really well as a dog coming off a competitive loss as an underdog last week.
It just kind of popped in my head now, Vince, that Green Bay in all 3 of their home divisional matchups this season, they were a double-digit favorite against Detroit back in Week 2 of that Monday night, against Chicago on the Sunday night, and they're all primetime games, and then against Minnesota now because of the Kirk Cousins news. And they covered in the first two against Detroit and Chicago. So now you kind of wonder if Green Bay, if that would go against the trend of 0-6 straight up and against the spread when losing in their last meeting. That's kind of interesting that Green Bay does that. They don't bounce back in that second meeting.
Yeah, it's not something I think you'd necessarily expect thinking about the Packers and Aaron Rodgers. You mentioned those first two primetime games. Actually, both were sort of similar in fashion, where Green Bay got off the slow starts in both games. And I can't remember. I know Chicago had that early lead. I'm pretty sure Detroit led early in that weekend matchup against Green Bay as well. And then Green Bay really turned it on late. So, it might be a case, maybe there's a similar type game and Green Bay turns it on, but doesn't get to the huge 13, 14-point number. Just not that worried about Sean Mannon behind center if they have a 7-10 point lead. Definitely could be a scenario where the Vikings cover a game where Green Bay still has things pretty well in hand.
That Detroit game, it was 17-14 Lions at the half, and then Green Bay scored 3 unanswered touchdowns in the second half. So you're laying 11.5, and they needed those 3 touchdowns. And I don't know if you remember this, you remember a lot of things, but Detroit had the ball late, and they could have got a backdoor cover, and Jared Goff was intercepted or fumbled or something like that. And even that Chicago game, the Bears were on their way to maybe winning that game. Forget about covering, and then Green Bay went on that big run. So, again, I think we're putting a little too much stock maybe in the Cousins being out. Dalvin Cook's going to be there, no Thielen. It's a tough one. It's a tough one with a quarterback you haven't really seen before.
Yeah, and it's interesting they're going with Mannon over Mond here, and we'll see how the week shakes out, I guess, as well. But, yeah, I do remember that Detroit-Green Bay matchup, but mainly because I had the Packers in that game. I was worried about the late backdoor cover there in that last drive before Goff got intercepted.
Yeah, and that was like, oh, come on, Dan Campbell, don't do this to us now, please. All right, Vince Akins, you could find his work on Twitter at SB Breakers. Also, he's had a great NFL season on Vegas Insider, and also Gridiron Angles. They'll be coming out this weekend for Week 17 of the NFL. You can find that on Vegas Insider this weekend. Vince, thank you so much for the time. It's been a great year having you on the Daily Insider, and we'll talk to you again next week for Week 18 for the regular season finale.
Absolutely. Good luck, everyone, and enjoy it. This is a great football time with playoffs tonight, bowl games tomorrow, and NFL Sunday into Monday.
So it should be good, and yeah, we appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon. Happy New Year.
You too. Take care.
All right, there is Vince Akins, and yeah, that Minnesota line has just jumped. It's almost up to 2 touchdowns now, where they're about a 2-touchdown underdog, 13 against Green Bay coming up on Sunday night at Lambeau Field. I want to tell you now about DraftKings and the championship series. You want to be the GOAT? You want to wear the crown like our friend on the screen? He's going to 2022 as the GOAT. He is like the 10-time champion GOAT. And you could do that if you want. Score your seat to the Tournament of Champions. The DraftKings Championship Series is the ultimate competition of contest winners from daily fantasy sports, sportsbook, and casino. The one and only place you can compete in the king of competitions. The best of the best in each domain will compete for series supremacy in their own domain's Tournament of Champions. They'll have one goal in mind: win the ultimate crown and earn the title of the greatest of all time, the GOAT. That's right. You could be that GOAT. Wear that crown. Check out DraftKings.com for more details. All right, we got the 2 other bowl games ongoing now. The Gator Bowl in Jacksonville. Wake Forest leads Rutgers 17-10. 2.5 minutes to go in the first half. And Wake closed a 17-point favorite. Remember, this was supposed to be Wake and Texas A&M. A&M pulled out because of COVID issues. So Rutgers at 5-7. They're in, but right now they're hanging around the Scarlet Knights. So we'll give them that. The Sun Bowl in El Paso, Washington State and Central Michigan, they are scoreless in the first, and that line dropped. Washington State was a 7-point favorite this morning. It dropped to 5.5. They're closed at 5.5. The Cougars finished on a good run this year. Remember their head coach, Nick Rolovich, he got let go. He wasn't going to get the COVID shot, and he didn't go to the school's standards or policies, so he was gone with a couple assistant coaches. But Washington State actually had a pretty good ending to the season. Central Michigan ended with 4 straight wins. They were supposed to play Boise State in the Arizona Bowl, but Boise State had COVID issues, so Central Michigan is playing Washington State because Miami, they pulled out of the game due to COVID problems within their program. So That's what we have now. Sun Bowl ongoing and scoreless in the first. Georgia, Michigan tonight, 7:30, Hard Rock Stadium in Miami for the Orange Bowl. The Cotton Bowl this afternoon, Cincinnati and Alabama. And the Crimson Tide laying 13.5 tomorrow. 5 games for the Bulls. Again, all meaningless. But 5 games, though, getting to the better bowl games. Arkansas and Penn State, the Outback Bowl at noon in Tampa. Arkansas laying 2.5. The Fiesta Bowl at 1 in Arizona. Oklahoma State and Notre Dame. Pretty good matchup there. Notre Dame laying 2.5 against Okie State. Kentucky and Iowa in the Citrus Bowl in Orlando at 1 o'clock. Kentucky a 3-point favorite. The Rose Bowl in Pasadena, Utah and Ohio State, and the Buckeyes without some of their top receivers who are not playing in the game. Ohio State laying 4 against Utah. Then the Sugar Bowl, Baylor and Mississippi at the Superdome in New Orleans, 8:45 tomorrow night. Ole Miss laying 1.5 there against Baylor. And Baylor, remember, they won the Big 12 championship over Oklahoma State. College basketball, there's not a lot to choose from. Hofstra, Elon, that was supposed to start at noon. That game got bagged because of COVID. So you're down to now 3 games on the docket as far as, well, conference games. Northeastern and William and Mary in the Colonial, along with Delaware and Charleston. And then Niagara and Quinnipiac, they'll start at 2 out of the Metro Atlantic. High Point in Kentucky, they're underway from Rupp. Kentucky laying 27 against Tubby Smith and High Point. They're retired. Tubby Smith's they put his number, whatever, in the rafters. I mean, he didn't play for the coach there. But Tubby back there in Lexington. And quickly looking at the NBA, big card tonight to close out the year. And we'll do a quick run through. Suns Celtics at 110 from TD Garden. The Celtics shot 4 of 42 from three-point range back on Wednesday in their loss to the Clippers. Phoenix laying 3.5 there against Boston Celtics, still without Jason Tatum. And he should clear the protocols pretty soon. Bulls and Pacers at 310 from Indiana. And Chicago, a 3.5-point favorite there. Pacers have lost back-to-back games. Chicago, they've won 5 straight since having their little COVID break. So they're 22-10 now on the season. Mavs and the Kings in Sacramento, second time they're playing in a few days. Sacramento won at the buzzer back on Wednesday, and the Mavs here laying 1.5. Mavs are down a lot of guys. Luka's still out. Tim Hardaway Jr. was in the protocols. A lot of their normal guys, I mean, except for Porzingis, are in the COVID protocols. But interesting, they're favored there against the Kings, who are pretty healthy at this point. Heat and the Rockets in Houston, and the Heat, they had to get Mario Chalmers off the street because they were out of players. But the Heat laying 4 against the Rockets tonight in Houston. Cavaliers a 1.5-point favorite against Atlanta in Cleveland. The Clippers and the Raptors meeting up in Toronto. And the Raptors, they're back up to full strength. 6.5-point favorites against the Clippers. Knicks laying 5 at Oklahoma City. No Julius Randle. He's in the protocols for New York. San Antonio's at Memphis. That line dropped. Grizzlies now laying 5. That's a rematch of the play-in tournament last year. Grizzlies beat the Spurs. Jazz laying 12.5 to the Timberwolves. And Utah, who had a lot of problems with Minnesota last year, they've already beaten the Timberwolves twice this year. Blazers and Lakers out at Crypto.com Arena. It's not Staples Center anymore. Lakers a 5.5-point favorite over the Blazers, and that closes out 2021. BetMGM, the king of sportsbooks. Bet $10 to win $200 if your team scores a touchdown. Bet $10 to win $200 if your team scores a touchdown. That's simple. I just repeated it just to let you know again. New players only. Bet on any NFL money line, and if your team scores a touchdown, you'll receive an additional $200 in free bets. Again, new players only. Must be 21 years or older to play, and legal in Arizona, New Jersey, Indiana, Colorado, Tennessee, West Virginia, Iowa, Virginia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Washington, D.C. only. Full terms and conditions apply. That is BetMGM. They are the king of sportsbooks. My thanks to Vince Akins for joining us here to wrap up 2021 and his trends. He always works hard on those every single week to get them out to you. And coming up on Monday, Dave Sherapan will join us, our first show of 2022, to recap Week 17 of the NFL. And no Saturday games in the NFL. Obviously, no games last night, so everything on Sunday. Then the Monday night game between the Browns and Steelers. And then we have Week 18, which will have 2 Saturday games, and then everything else on Sunday. So that's what we're looking forward to in the NFL. And again, very thankful that you have been watching and following the show here on YouTube and trying to just keep this thing going, keep this train rolling. And we appreciate you tuning in on a daily basis. If you do every day or this is your first time, we welcome you. But thank you very much, and we look forward to a good 2022. I am Kevin Rogers. Thanks a lot for watching, and as always, best of luck with your bets.